Matt, there's an issue in society. We're scared of risk. How did this happen? What's causing this? And where do you see it going?
That is a great topic. I cannot wait to start going back and forth about this, Grayson. I'm glad you entertained my idea about covering this topic.
You're welcome. It has to happen. You get in your car, it's a risk. You walk down the street, it's a risk. I'm going to put my Matt hat on here. You go mountain biking or do something extreme, it's a risk. But yet you're willing to take those risks.
Risk is something I understand personally. You've already hit on a couple of my hobbies. I fly hang gliders. I backcountry ski. I dive with sharks in an aquarium once a month as a volunteer. All of my hobbies have helmets. And so when I think about my personal life, and every time I choose to do something, Grayson, I'm taking on a certain level of risk. My professional life, of course, VP of Sustainability Innovation, Covenant Logistics, we're a trucking company that understands risk. We're always one accident away from a nuclear verdict. And so, trust me, it's a world I live in every day. And I'm glad we're talking about this as it relates to autonomy, because I think it's just one of the biggest things that we haven't really talked about in depth yet.
We haven't talked about this in depth yet, and it's scary. I'll give you a number here. 19,937 crashes happen every single day in the United States. Yet, barely 1, 2, 3, let's say 1% make the news. But when an autonomous vehicle gets in a fender bender or gets hit or somebody does something stupid and drives their bike into it, it's national headlines. That's going to cause risk aversion because people are afraid of being sued. You mentioned the nuclear verdict on the trucking side. Look at Warner. What are they going to do with this nuclear verdict? Warner wasn't at fault, but yet some drive-by ambulance lawyers, well, I'm going to get a cut of the pie. So guess what? Let's sue. How do we stop that to allow innovation to prosper?
Before we dive into this, and I really can't wait, I got to say one thing to your audience. I don't want anyone that is listening, and you and I both have a lot of friends that are going to be listening to this. I don't want anyone to mistake anything that we say for the marginalization of human life or the fact that risk is not important or that we're putting some sort of monetary value on life. This is a discussion to be held at a 50,000-foot overview, because I think some of the things we'll talk about will make it sound like we don't appreciate the value of life, because ultimately that's what risk is all about, is making sure that, at least for the most part, that everything is safe. The drugs we take are safe. The cars we ride in are safe. The flights that we take are safe at the end of the day. So again, just don't want anybody to think that we don't care about human life.
Lawyers care about human life. They put a monetary value on it when they sue and they put a billboard on. You gave a legal statement, so I gave my own legal statement. I have no legal statement. I'm just going to shoot it straight with you here. Where are we going? In 1971, tobacco was banned from TV and radio. What if all advertising for lawyers was banned from TV and radio today? When I say TV, I mean over the air. You see these jingles on TV. Oh, you got into a crash? Sue! These catchy jingles. That's incentivizing the people to do it. What if we follow the 1971 president, banned legal advertising on TV, and then you want to have some real fun on tort reform? Lawyers are not entitled to percentage of the money that's rewarded. That would stop.
Where do you stop? It's interesting. I'm 54 years old. I think we talked about our respective ages. I grew up in a time when everybody didn't wear helmets. Maybe you wore seatbelts. You certainly didn't have a car that wouldn't shut up, right? If your seatbelt light didn't go off, if you didn't buckle your seatbelt. I think that life has gotten safer over time, maybe due to things like this, but at what expense? I think what kind of precipitated you and I sort of wanting to have this discussion was, you already kind of jumped into it. You mentioned 1971. I forwarded you an article written by this science writer about most of our big disruptive innovations that have taken place in society took place prior to 1971. And without getting into the nuances of the entire article, which is fascinating, I would encourage your listeners to read it. The writer talks about how our advances after that date have slowed down. And he makes an argument that it's because of our aversion to risk. In your case, talking about lawyers and tort reform, obviously that's been a part of it. But I think what has happened as a society that has made us all averse to risk. Think about when we put man on the moon. I don't think we would put men on the moon today. Those guys had like a 50% chance of coming home. And by today's standard, we would never do that. We would never send somebody to Mars or to the moon, given those types of statistics. So what is that litmus test? When you think about autonomy, is it going to be ultimately risk that keeps us from rolling the technology out faster, which I think is what we want to focus on? How much of what we're working on is about the edge cases and the risk associated with those edge cases?
It's not going to be the risk that's going to slow this down. It's going to accelerate because of the economy. Inflation is out of control. It's rising. Autonomy is going to lower the cost. That's what's going to accelerate this risk. Yes, the companies are going to manage the risk. They're going to marginalize the risk, but the risk is not going to slow this down. If you look back, the man on the moon, let's go back to President Kennedy, Cold War. That's what drove that. Drove us to the moon. What's driving us to automation today is inflation. Inflation is the new Cold War.
A lot of things that have happened in life, like when you go back and think about COVID, here we had a point in our history when everybody was scared, nobody knew what to do. We were really pushing for the innovation of inventing a vaccine. What was the name of that act? We were talking about it earlier. It was
the PrEP Act.
The PrEP Act, right? The Public Readiness Emergency Preparedness Act. And so basically what that did was it gave pharmaceutical companies blanket immunity for lawsuits if the vaccine that they released ever had a negative effect on anybody. I don't recall that ever really having been invoked at any point in history, and I'm older than you, so my knowledge might go back a little bit further. But what if something is something like that, what it's going to take for some of the risk of autonomy to be accepted? I don't know. This is going to be one of those interesting conversations where I don't know if we're actually going to have a single answer to it. We're just going to throw up a lot of ideas and maybe see what your listenership thinks.
What is the risk of autonomy? You sit here and call it a risk. I sit here and call it a benefit. If you look at a risk, it is a bigger risk today getting in your vehicle and driving, because a majority, and I'm saying this very bluntly, over 50% of Americans stare at their phone when they're driving. That's a risk, and it's only accelerating. Americans' desire to drive is decelerating. Americans' desire to pay attention is decelerating. Autonomous vehicles don't text, they don't get distracted, they don't stare at a phone when they drive. Autonomous vehicles are actually doing the opposite. They're reducing risks, but the problem is you have special interests, especially the trial bar, they want you to believe that autonomous vehicles are the boogeyman. They're not the boogeyman. They're good for society. They're going to save lives. They're going to improve mobility. But yet, people are saying they're risky. Why are they risky? Would you rather go in a vehicle with a driver going 80 miles an hour down the highway staring at a phone where the reaction times are extremely limited? Or would you rather go 80 miles an hour down a highway in an autonomous vehicle that's fully paying attention? That vehicle is capable, in your case, of a truck seeing 500 meters ahead. The Too Simple truck was seeing 1,000 meters ahead. I was in the Aurora truck recently in Palmer, Texas, 500 meters ahead. You're staring at your phone. I got a phone right here. You're staring at this. You're not seeing 500 meters down the road. You're going to crash. The autonomous truck or the autonomous vehicle won't crash. So how is that a bigger risk?
No, I agree with you. And let me just clarify, you and I are not on different pages with our perception of AV. I see it as a benefit. I see it for all the things that you do. Trust me, I'm running the autonomous program for our organization. So I'm very bullish on it. And our partners, you mentioned Aurora, Torque is somebody else that we work with closely. But we do talk about risk because, hey, we're in trucking, right? I mean, we are all about safety. We're all about creating a safe environment for our drivers, for our customers, obviously for the motoring public. So I think that if it wasn't for a lot of the attention that consumer self-driving has brought to this entire issue over the last 5, 6, 7 years, ever since Elon Musk started putting really advanced level 2 and then level 3 technology into his vehicles, and just how wonderful it was for all of us to experience. But then every once in a while, you would start to have an incident here, an incident there. And I think that really kind of brought the risk component of autonomy front and center into the minds of the motoring public, into the trial attorneys that are always looking for the next easy target to go after. I think so much of the problem that carriers like us and the OEMs and the manufacturers that are making this technology is, I think, a significant amount of the investment at this point, because I feel like a lot of the tech has been, I don't want to say solved. I've ridden in some of the same trucks you have, and I'm incredibly impressed with the performance that they give. But I was just at one of our partners meetings this week, and we had 7 of the largest carriers in the room, and the conversation that we were all talking about was cybersecurity. And what if somebody nefariously took over a truck and did something terrible with it? We spent an hour sort of talking through what that was and what the precautions that the company was going to take to put that technology in. That technology being something that has a hardware cost, a software cost, a development cost. Here we are spending a lot of money at cybersecurity to kind of de-risk this thing that we love to call autonomy. So I know I've said sort of a lot of things there, but I didn't really answer any of your questions specifically. But you can't not think about this wonderful thing called autonomy without thinking about our approach as Americans to risk and how it's evolved over the years.
Our approach has evolved. If we had the same apprehension towards risk today, would we have a man on the moon? No. Would we have the internet? Possibly no. Would we have nuclear energy? Well, that's definitely a no, because that's a dirty word, but yet nuclear energy carries so many possibilities. Look at the Manhattan Project. They innovated. They were protected by the government, but they innovated. Look what's being developed today with AI, the breakthroughs in large language models. They're innovating. And now you got this very loud vocal minority saying, hey, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. Why is it bad? Why are you trying to suffocate a technology that's going to have global economic prosperity attached to it? That's the question that I ask. Did you walk out of your house? Yes. Do you breathe the air? Yes. Do you drink water? Yes. You want to know a little fact? There's risk in drinking water because there's microbes and plastics in the water that could cause cancer. You step out of your house, the air is potentially polluted. You breathe that, you can catch cancer. But yet you don't try and make it illegal to go outside your house. You don't try and make it illegal to drink water. But yet these individuals try and make it illegal to embrace autonomy. They're trying the same thing with AI. It just seems every new technology comes a new boogeyman.
Okay, so you brought up a word I was about to use, so you stole it, the boogeyman. It's interesting because this is a very unstructured conversation, right? Because we're talking about a lot of different things as it relates to autonomy. But when I think about, like, my wife is a physician, every day she goes into work and she's working with patients, and she is always reading about new drugs and procedures. And there are some things that she tells me about that she's super excited about that are almost ready for release to be passed by the FDA. But it gets caught up because like 0.1% of the test group had a negative outcome. And so they don't move forward with that. She was sharing with me a patient of hers she's an OBGYN. So this was an ovarian cancer situation. And there was an experimental drug that this patient could have taken who was terminal to potentially deal with this. So this woman had really nothing to lose, and she was willing to sign everything away with this drug company in order to be in the test group. And ultimately, because the FDA, again, the nuances behind this get really complicated, doesn't really make sense to go into now, but they basically said, no, you can't take it. And she's like, you don't understand. I am willing to die. I am going to die anyway. This is a Hail Mary. I am willing to take that risk. And they still wouldn't let her participate in it. And I just think that if we've come to that as a society, we talk about risk as a boogeyman, right, to use your word. But, I think a lot of this is individualized. It's how you and I and the person listening to this podcast think about risk. I think it's not the government. It's not the OEMs. It's not the trial lawyers. I think you and I sort of own a piece of this mentality that we have that I think is really keeping really some great disruptive technologies like autonomy from moving forward. And what's it going to take to change that? Is it going to take another PrEP Act like we had with COVID? Is that what it's going to take? Is it going to take people just saying, relax? I'll tell you one other story. It was interesting. A couple of years ago, I was in New Zealand for work. And actually, it was more than a couple of years ago because it was pre-covenant. And I'd signed up for this really risky outdoor activity. And anyway, in the middle of this activity, we were in a cave and it was dark and we were in the water, and the guide said, whatever you do, don't go to the left of my voice. And I said, why not? He says, if you do, you'll fall off a 2,000-foot cliff and we'll never find you again. And I sort of said, wow, I don't remember signing a waiver when I came in here. And he just chuckled and said, you must be an American. He says, in New Zealand, the culture is that if you do something dumb like that, then it's sort of Darwin's survival of the fittest. They just don't have the same approach to risk that we do here in the States. And so I think it's just interesting. I kind of point the finger back at myself a little bit when I talk about this. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. If you look at your example, you have a life and death situation. Are you going to listen to the guide or you're not going to listen to the guide? And if you look at that unfortunate case with your wife's patient, it's sad. Under President Nixon, he launched the war on cancer. Unfortunately, we didn't get anywhere. You look at that, you look at the PrEP Act, and we talk about this a lot. Why can't we put the PrEP Act and put all of our medical resources to curing cancer? That's something that blows my mind. Is that risk there? Because we have to cure that. There's no doubt about we have to cure cancer, but yet it seems that for whatever reason, we can't move forward with curing cancer. Is that risk again?
Yeah, I just think that as individuals, we are just obsessed with our physical safety, our financial safety. Again, perfectly legitimate things to be wanting to be comforted about. But when it comes to the price of an airline ticket, the price of your car, the price of that awesome shirt that you're wearing right now that I wish people could see. What if you licked your shirt and there was some sort of chemical involved with making it yellow? You have to have adequate protection against the person that's going to lick their shirt. I just think that we have on some level reached a level of ridiculousness that I think is starting to really not just cost us money, but also keeping us from moving forward. I know that in the few minutes of prep that we had for this call, you and I talked about some of the more ridiculous, well-known lawsuits, like the McDonald's. We talked about the McDonald's one that happened, back in the early 90s?
Yeah, it's actually here. I actually read the court case in prepping for this podcast, and I'm going to quote you something out of the court filings. It was on February 27, 1992, 79-year-old Stella Leibach ordered a 49-cent cup of coffee. Can you believe that? In 1992, a 49-cent cup of coffee? That's pretty amazing. I'd love to have a 49-cent cup of coffee today. And she ordered that from a drive-thru window of a local McDonald's restaurant located at 5001 Gibson Boulevard Southeast in her hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Not quoting this here, Albuquerque also home to a partner of Covenant's, Torque Robotics. Back to the court case. Leibach, a passenger in her grandson's Toyota, which did not have cup holders, pulled over so his grandmother could add cream and sugar to her coffee. Miss Leibach placed the cup of coffee between her knees and pulled the far side of the lid toward her to remove it. Most people do that. In the process, she spilled the entire cup of coffee on her lap. Leibach was wearing cotton sweatpants. They absorbed the coffee and held it against her skin, scalding her thighs, buttocks, and groins. Okay, that's from the court case. So then what happened next? She goes to McDonald's. That's Food Folks Fun. That's Ronald McDonald here, folks. She asks for $20,000 for the cost of her medical bills. Not questioning inflation if that's high or not. McDonald's, they screwed the pooch on this. They offered her $800. She rebuffed the offer from McDonald's. What does she do? She retains an attorney and she sues. During the discovery process, God bless the lawyers, her lawyers found that McDonald's coffee was made to be about 50 degrees hotter than the average chain restaurants. 1994, she won a lawsuit. A jury awarded her $2.7 million. It was later reduced to $480,000. Lo and behold, today we have the hot coffee stamp on every cup of coffee that you now buy because of that lawsuit to avoid risk. But let's keep going to the McDonald's. This gets fun here. I was researching this little case, and a similar case happened in 2023 when an 85-year-old San Francisco resident sued McDonald's over a hot cup of coffee. She didn't win anything. But again, she sued, so McDonald's had to pay legal fees. When does this stop? I spill a cup of coffee on myself. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I did it to myself.
I know. And, we could come up with hundreds of other anecdotal examples just like that. I did want to bring up the one that you've already mentioned. I refer to the Werner lawsuit all the time just because here's a situation where in 2018, the driver of that truck did nothing wrong. In fact, he operated well within the agreeable standard of safety, and yet they're on the hook for $100 million if that verdict actually goes through. That is just terrible. I was reading in, I guess it was FreightWaves or Transport Topics just a couple days ago that on March 29th, the Democratic governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, vetoed a bill that would limit carrier awards at $1 million. And granted, he gave a lot of reasons why there shouldn't be a cap, but this is a state that ironically has economic limits on non-economic damages for malpractice. We have caps involved with that. And the state where I live, Tennessee, has caps. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect between what he agreed to and what the state already has on the books for other types of events. But I just think that what we can agree on, and probably your listener can agree on, is that there is some level of tort reform that we probably need as a society, whether it's about trucking or autonomous or personal injury for sure. And over time, maybe that will start affecting our attitude toward risk. I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball and could give you like the one thing that we could do. But I think long-term aversion to risk, I think our long-term approach to risk would change if there was some nationwide tort reform, especially for suits like the McDonald's one you mentioned.
You need nationwide tort reform. I'll go on the record and say it. We need tort reform. Tort reform is good for the economy, just the same way autonomy is good for the economy. I'm going to give you a little bit of a curveball here. What if every United States citizen, 18 or older, had to manage their own risk? You walk out of your house, you manage your own risk. You bet on a baseball game or you bet on a football game, you manage your risk. You put something in the oven and you don't wear a glove to take it out, you manage your risk. If you grab something out of the oven without a glove, do you sue Viking? Do you sue Sub-Zero? No, you took a risk by doing that, or you were just dumb and drunk and did it on your own. What if you could not sue anymore for stupid things? You had to manage your own risk. Would this all go away?
First of all, if you just all of a sudden flipped a switch and made that true, I think half the people in the United States would probably kick the bucket right away because they wouldn't be able to exist. I just think it's so, what you just described, I'll be honest with you, is the way that I pretty much live my life every day, Grayson. And I know you and I are very similar in a lot of ways, and we've talked about this. And it's just the way that I live my life. My everything from if I invest in a bad stock, it's kind of my fault. Ultimately, I mean, at least outside of what I have with the professional advisor, right? That little piece that I keep in my autonomy portfolio. If I invest in Luminar or Ovia or Kodiak or one of these other companies, if it doesn't do well, it's my fault. If it does well, that's great. I made a great decision. If I eat Cheetos all the time and gain weight from it or have heart problems from it, that's my fault. To kind of bring this back to my wife and I talk about this a lot because, as a physician, she's responsible for women's health. And she talks about how probably 30 to 40% of her patients wouldn't even need to come see her in the first place if they just had more responsibility for the decisions that they make about what they do to their body and what they put in their body, right? Personal responsibility for the risk that you take for just sort of existing every day. So, yeah, I think half the people in the world would fall apart in the first 48 hours of your scenario. But ironically, we do it every day, right? I mean, you get in a car, you get on a plane. I've got a friend that is unrealistically scared to death of airplanes. I've debated with him regularly about how safe they are statistically, but he won't get in one. He gets in a car instead, and the stats will tell you that there's a much higher accident of you getting killed in a car driving for 12 hours between Chattanooga and New York than it is if he gets in a plane and makes that same commute. So ultimately, we do and need to have some responsibility for our actions. But again, to kind of bring this back to autonomy, these trucks, once they're fully developed, the algorithms are in place and the learning models are in place, are just like you said, they're going to be safer. They're going to operate more consistently. When I say consistently, they're not going to get tired. They're not going to get distracted. They're going to be a safer alternative to humans. And again, I'm not suggesting that autonomy is going to take over every driving job in the country. We like to say at Covenant, if you start to come work for us as a driver at age 21, if you want to retire as a driver, you will be able to do that. But there are certain routes and certain use cases in our country where autonomy is going to be a great fit. And when you and I are driving down the road next to a truck that doesn't have a human in it, we don't need to be scared of it. And it may take us a while to kind of get over that kind of mentality. And maybe like my friend Genesis that's scared of airplanes, and he'll never not be scared of airplanes. He's going to have to figure it out at some point, I guess. But I think that we're all going to have to accept the fact that what it takes for us to get to a better place, whether it's with freight delivery, medicine, or you name it, we're going to have to accept the fact that just bad things happen sometimes. And again, like I told you in the beginning of the podcast, I don't want to marginalize life or marginalize safety, but I just feel like risk is something that has gone a little bit too far, our aversion to risk.
You cannot marginalize safety.
This is probably one of the most unstructured podcasts you've ever done, isn't it?
It's fantastic. If you look at safety and you look at doing the things, we see the unfortunate reports. Look at the Challenger. It was from the condensation of the bolts, and they knew it, but they still went forward. That's sad. And that's a government-run program. They lost a teacher in space, not to mention all the other souls that perished in that unfortunate crash. Did that slow down the spacecraft? Yes, for a while. I remember I was in school, and you'll remember this, when they rolled it in on the wheels, and it had the big strap around the TV, and they rolled it, and we watched it on TV. Never forget that moment. Sad moment. Did it slow down the space program for a while? Yes, but then the space program came back, and then it was eventually dormant until a gentleman named Elon Musk came along and pioneered reusable rockets with his own money and private sector capital. And look where we are today. Those rockets are operating fully autonomously. They're taking off and landing fully autonomously. We're putting humans in the International Space Station from a private sector rocket. We never stopped innovating. We cannot allow an unfortunate incident in history to allow us to stop innovating, to allow us to stop moving progress forward. If you want to look back at airlines, we almost lost a president. A president was going to go for a flight with Orville Wright. What happened that day? Orville crashed. Orville never flew again, died months later. We almost lost a president. But yet, what did we do? We kept moving forward. Could you imagine the day that the Wright brothers crashed and Orville perished months after that flight, that if we stopped aviation, we wouldn't have a global economy today. History has to be our guide when we look to manage risk.
I agree. And I think that our approach to it since the 70s has changed. I don't think there's any one thing that has caused it, Grayson. I think that over time it's just kind of evolved. I think probably, maybe as much as I hate to bring this up on your podcast, there's probably some politics involved with it. There are scare tactics that different parties use to sort of keep their base kind of in check. There's the boogeyman of terrorism, or the boogeyman of Russia. Remember back in the 80s when we were talking about the invasion, there was this boogeyman of nuclear war. There was the boogeyman of COVID. Again, not to bring up something overly controversial, but I think we use fear and risk to sort of keep people worried, to keep people watching their news network, to keep people buying certain things. I mean, every day I'm pitched with something. I just got something in the mail today about I can pay $20 a month to have my water line between my house and my street insured in case it ever breaks, because that's roughly a $5,000 repair. Every day I've got somebody trying to call me, extend the warranty on my vehicle. We constantly play into our fear of risk and risk aversion, mostly from a financial perspective. Over time, collectively, that just kind of makes us scared of our own shadows sometimes. And there's a lot to be made to be money in fear and risk. And so I wish there was like one answer that we could share with the audience. I just think that it kind of makes sense to have this conversation, see where it goes. But obviously, I think we can agree that tort reform is probably one thing. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that we would have from this.
I'll follow on your fear line. Fear sells. Look at Blumhouse Productions, horror production films. Their numbers and the profitability they have. Look at Blair Witch Project. And then you got Jason, you got Michael Myers, you got Freddy Krueger, I'm Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street. Fear sells. Look at the economic box office impact that horror has. It's astronomical. People pay to get scared. It's a risk because you could have a heart attack if you're scared. Your wife could tell you that. She's got medical data to back that up.
Yep.
Fear sells.
Even when you go back and you look at it, there's aspects of religion. You're going to hell if you don't do this, or give me this. There's a lot of, I just think it's everywhere. And as I'm sitting here looking behind you at the background, which if you're listening to Grayson's podcast, you can't see, but you got a swimming pool back there, right? And there's probably some accelerated level of insurance you have to carry just to have a swimming pool. You have to have a fence around it to keep people out to potentially drown. You've got probably some umbrella policy to sort of deal with a potential accident if something happens. We just can't get away from it. And again, I don't know. I think the New Zealanders, like I've kind of approached before, their approach to risk is a little bit different than ours as a culture. I really haven't spent significant amounts of time in European countries to know if their aversion to risk is the same as ours. It's really ever since I started working with Autonomy and seeing and experiencing how potentially fantastic these solutions are going to be, with the fact that they're going to be held up longer than they need to be, just because we have to answer so many of these questions and to have insurance policies and cybersecurity expenses and things to sort of deal with the what if scenarios. Because in trucking, Grayson, it's the risk that probably where a lot of the cost is at the end of the day.
The cost is there, but before we get to the cost, fear is unfortunately become political. If you remember when Mitt Romney was running for president with Paul Ryan as his vice president, and there was that famous video where, Paul Ryan's going to push Granny over the cliff. That scared the living pajamas out of people. It truly scared people because people believed that was what's going to happen. So that goes back to my whole theory on fear sells. And if you look at the risk in trucking in Q1 2024, J.B. Hunt reported first quarter earnings that fell 35% on a 9% sales decline. Operating income fell 30% to $194.4 million due to lower volumes as well as increases in equipment cost, insurance claims, and bad debt. Insurance is driving up the cost of JB Hunt and driving down the revenue. This is getting bad because I was talking to a trucking executive, a mutual friend of ours, and he says, remember the gas surcharges? He goes, oh, that's nothing. Insurance surcharges are coming, and they're going to be passed through.
I mentioned earlier I was with 7 other fleets with one of the 2 people that we have as our partner. And one of the things that we talked about was we're trying to get our arms around cost, right? Because I think that, pivot this back to autonomy a little bit, one of the things that is still kind of at the forefront of our mind is it's one thing for you to tell us how much the truck and the subscription model to the technology is going to cost, but what about the whole ecosystem that goes around it? What about the real estate and the yards and the extra people that are going to have to be involved in order to launch and land and refuel and do trailer inspections? But what's the insurance piece going to be? is the argument going to be that insurance is going to be less expensive because this is going to be a safer technology? Or is the idea that because it's going to be targeted for the first few years as a massive potential risk, that insurance prices are going to go up? And how does that affect the overall model as it relates to cost per mile and how we ultimately justify doing this in the first place? I think that the uncertainty of the insurance piece is going to be something that's going to be really hard to nail down. I think it's going to take a lot of time in order for safe miles, safe to be driven. But then assume we have 5 million safe miles, and then all of a sudden somebody gets nudged off the road due to inexplicable thing that will inevitably happen because accidents always happen. Is that going to get front page news as opposed to you and I driving a truck and doing the same thing? Probably. And why is that? It's this culture of fear and sort of the cost and everything that goes around it. I'm kind of getting frustrated myself listening talk about this with you because I feel like we're sort of doom and gloom and there's nothing positive to look forward to, and innovation is always going to be stagnant. But it's just something that in innovation space professionally, I think about pretty regularly, almost every day.
There's a lot to be positive about.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some positive stuff for a change.
We're being honest. If you look at Tesla driving on full self-driving, they're driving 1 billion miles every 2 to 3 months. 1 billion miles. That's 1 billion with a B. Billion. Why don't we benchmark that against a human driver and see how many crashes and incidents are there? Oh, you can't do that. Oh, no. Elon's bad. You can't do that. Because I talked to a reporter at a major international outlet. I said, why all the negativity on Elon and Tesla? Oh, you have no idea how much ad revenue it sells.
It's nuts. And so we're doing this to ourselves, I guess, is one conclusion we can walk away with. It's just something that I wish there was a better answer to. I think that the times I've driven in FSD mode, I don't have a Tesla, but I have friends that do. It's unbelievable what a great job it does as long as you're inside the ODD that thing was designed to operate in. And when I think of some of the bad drivers that you and I probably both know, I'd feel much safer using that technology than I would some of the people that I routinely get in the car with. We have to accept that bad things happen. It's not always somebody's fault. We're going to have to figure out a way to think about risk differently as a society, and we're going to have to implement some kind of tort reform in order for some of these big disruptive innovations that you and I get excited about every day when we open the paper and read. As it relates to autonomy, I think that maybe some version of the Public Readiness of Preparedness Act, maybe it's going to take that. I don't know.
If you look at new innovative technology in history that have ruffled stuff, at the end of the day, it all comes down to economics and money. James Carville had that very famous line, "It's the economy, stupid." Mr. Carville is right. It is the economy, stupid. Not saying anybody's stupid, but it is the economy. Remember in the early days of Uber, this is when Travis was still there. This is before UberX. This is when they just had the black cars. And you're starting to see all this data pop up. New York, Boston, San Francisco, Miami. DUIs start going down. Remember the outrage from all the money that was being lost from lawyers and revenue that was generated because people weren't drinking and driving anymore? They were going into Ubers. Remember the meltdown that caused?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was nuts.
Uber did a good thing for society. And you're looking at that Uber example. I know it's not autonomous, but Uber is going to usher in autonomy through their platform. The same thing's going to happen with it. The same thing's happening with autonomy. Oh, it's bad. It's going to have all these positive economic benefits. And then eventually it'll just go in there. If you look at a toddler, we're in the teething phase of autonomy today. Truly are in the teething phase. And we're going to get through that, and they're going to start walking, where the technology will start growing and scaling. But yet there's always going to be someone that's going to try and derail it for their own economic benefit and gain. That's the truth on this risk. The risk is there for somebody to benefit economically. You eliminate the economic benefit from that, the technology moves forward. Or you keep your head down, you do what's right for society, and in your case, you keep on trucking forward.
I agree with everything you just said. I just think that equally, if not maybe just a little bit more default, I just think that our individual approach to risk, we just have to start thinking of it differently. As I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, we've talked about COVID already, so just another COVID example. Remember the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that came out and they pulled it off the market? They put out almost 7.5 million doses. Okay, there were 6 clots in overweight people and 1 death, and they pulled this thing off the market. And there was already a lot of question about comorbidity factors and weight and overweight people being disproportionately affected by the vaccine in a negative way. 7.1 million doses, 6 clots, 1 death, and they pulled this thing off the market. This thing that supposedly was going to be the thing that was supposed to sort of save us all. I just, I remember talking to my parents who are older, a little elderly, and they get terrified over everything. And like, I'm not taking that Johnson & Johnson drug. I heard it killed people. And I just think that we're going to have to start adjusting our own individual positions on just a lot of things in order for this to begin to get a little bit better.
It went viral. It became cocktail chatter where individuals were talking about it. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not going to give a medical opinion on if it was good or bad, but people started talking about it. I remember it very clearly. People were like, no, I'm not taking that. And that goes back into the fear element. When you look at autonomy, for certain individuals outside of our industry, outside of the technology that we're working very hard to introduce and advocate for, and in your case, deploy, there's fear. How do we collectively get over that fear? Is there anything that Covenant's doing from the trucking logistics side to help get over that fear? Or how do we collectively get over that fear?
I'll get to your story in a sort of circuitous kind of way. We implemented this product last year. There's a company called Idyllic, and they make this safety platform. I think it's called Idyllic, but that's also the name of the company. And basically the idea behind it is they are in the predictive analytics of accidents. And so what happens is they pull data from the telematics of the trucks, so hard braking, hitting a curve, rapid acceleration, those types of events. They pull data from the HR system. They look at time off requests and sick days and people not showing up for work. They pull data from some of the safety systems that we have. They put all this stuff in this giant model. And basically our safety coordinator will come in every day and it'll say, Grayson Brulte is probably going to have an accident in the next 3 weeks. And I'm sort of oversimplifying this a little bit, but basically, and this actually happened with one of their other customers, they put all this stuff in the model. It predicted that this particular driver was likely to have an accident sometime in the not too distant future. They brought him in and said, hey, kind of a weird conversation to have with you, but the software says that it's going to predict you're going to have an accident. And there's some reasons behind it, but we just want to see if everything was okay. And the driver looked at the safety guy and said, how would you know that? And they said, well, the software has some indicators. And he said, I just had to put my dad in a retirement home because he has Alzheimer's and he can't live by himself. And I can't stop thinking about what a bad son I am for having to put my father in a retirement home. I can't concentrate. I'm having a hard time sleeping. And the safety person just said, hey, listen, take the next 2 weeks off and go be with your dad, get your head straight, and then come back to work. And that's what they did. And it wasn't any one thing that predicted that. It was the combination of a bunch of different data points that working together helped them sort of come up with that scenario. So did Idyllic help them prevent that accident? Maybe, or prevent an accident that never actually happened. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But I think that using technologies and things like that now can make fleets, can make companies that are in this kind of business a lot safer. We're investing in technologies and procedures and things to make our drivers safer, not just on the proactive side, but also on the reactive side. That's kind of one thing that we've done recently that we're pretty proud of. We're waiting for some of those stories to kind of come in and be inspirational to us where it happens to us firsthand. It's given us some good data so far and some good stories, but not quite as good as that one.
You know what that's called? Managing risk properly. It was well done.
And it's also called innovation. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's disruption because that's the changing of the way entire industry works, but it's an incredibly innovative way to making the industry better. Just I feel like automation is an innovative way, even a disruptive way of making our industry better. And when I read about risk and the role that it plays and what I feel like is a delayed roadmap for something, it's just a little frustrating. And I'm glad you and I are just sort of talking in an incredibly unstructured way. I think your average listener is going to think, man, those guys are all over the place today, weren't they?
Listen, we're downtown New York at a jazz club and we're jamming out. That's how I would describe this to you. Staying on the risk theme, how does Covenant manage the risk when you deploy autonomous trucks?
Well, so we're not there yet. And as you know, I mean, nobody is running autonomous trucks directly. There are a number of fleets that are doing autonomous pilots, but they're actually just sort of using the Torque truck, the Kodiak truck, the Wabi truck, the Aurora truck. But the manufacturer's actually operating the truck. They're just probably pulling the carrier's trailer. That's just kind of where we are right now. We haven't gotten that far in our autonomous journey yet, Grayson, to be honest with you, but we do talk about it internally. We talk about it would probably make sense to have a dedicated fleet operations department, dedicated autonomous group that's specifically trained just to focus on those types of technologies and the types of unique situations that come up with AV. So that's one way that we sort of think about it. Obviously, there would be a lot of data collection to ultimately be able to, there's always probably some element of self-insurance that all the carriers have. And so we want to be able to collect a lot of data to be able to prove that hopefully what everybody predicts, a better way to operate. I can't tell you that we have anything down pat yet because we have yet to do our first pilot.
You're going to do your pilot. You're going to do your pilot, and I can't wait to cheer you and the team at Covenant with your new COO, Dustin Cole now. I cheer you on as you deploy autonomy. You do your pilot, and you scale your pilot, becomes commercial. Putting this theme of this podcast together, Matt, what is the future of risk management?
What's the future of it? What I wish it would be is I wish that as individuals, we did a much better job of accepting sort of risk in the lives and the decisions that we make every day, from the food that we eat to the types of activities that we choose to engage with. I think that we're just going to have to, over time, as individuals, but also as the father of an 18-year-old that's about to go off to college, just teach our kids to, like, you just got to be more responsible for your actions. Not everything that happens in life is the fault of somebody else. I just think that that's probably one of the biggest things. And then I think that there's got to be some element of tort reform, just because I think that there are just too many examples of just ridiculously punitive lawsuits and product liability lawsuits that, like the one you mentioned, like the one with the McDonald's coffee cup, that are just out of control. And those are anecdotal, but they're significant, right? They make a big difference in the way prices are structured. I think those are probably the two things I would want to leave everybody with, because I think those are at least one of those two. The personal responsibility is something we can all sort of play into.
Personal responsibility comes down to your household, the way you were raised, the way you raise your kids, and the way you act as a citizen. Respect everybody, treat everybody fair, risk mitigates. Not going to go away, but it mitigates by being a good person and being an honest person. Matt, this has been a fun jam session. I wish we were down the Lower East Side in a jazz club recording this with a cocktail, but maybe perhaps that's down the line. For today, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them?
You're just like Guy Raz. You always ask that great question. I think it always catches me off guard because, this is my third or fourth time to be on your podcast. I appreciate being a repeat caller. I work in sustainability, and so to kind of not answer your question as it relates to autonomy, I think that I really always want to tell people to remember that you play a role in the way that emissions and carbon and the planet work as well. The decisions that we make, kind of back to our sort of risk thing, decisions we make in consumers collectively, over 8 billion people on the planet, make a difference. So don't forget that. Don't think that the fault of everything that happens in life is from big bad corporations like the ones that you talk about every day on your podcast, or the boogeyman for the reason why things need to be better. A lot of kind of these types of things begin at home. Teach your kids to eat dirt and have accidents as long as they don't kill themselves, and just to understand risk from an early age. Actions have consequences. I think the sooner we learn those types of lessons, the better off we're all going to be. And continue to follow the podcast, right? I mean, you've been on a roll lately. There's been some fantastic guests. In fact, I've got a couple of suggestions of people that might have slipped through the cracks that you haven't even talked to yet.
Well, let's have them on. I really want to do this, and I'm going to go in the Wayback Machine here. We got to do a live version of the show. We'll have you on. Maybe we'll have Dooner with us as well. We'll do a live version.
Oh, that'd be great.
I love Dooner. It'd be fun. We could do all things trucking. We could talk about risk. We could talk about autonomy. We could talk all about fun things. Then we can have callers. And there's this really great line from Joe Boningo from WFAN 660 AM New York Sports Radio. It goes, first time, long time caller. And I want somebody to do that because I love New York sports. Hopefully the Knicks pull it out tonight and the Yankees continue on their roll, because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, the future is managing risk.